In this session, we are going to discuss advanced SQL injection using the tool SQL Map. Now, we touched a little bit on SQL Map towards the end of last session and also discussed the basics of SQL injection. I would recommend you to watch the previous session before wanting to learn advanced techniques by clicking on the above link. The link is also left for your reference in the description of this video. Okay, let's jump into it. Now, for you to perform advanced SQL injections and extract information from the database, which is by default prohibited to end users, you should really have a good understanding of SQL commands. Now, some of these commands involve SQL operators and commands such as order by, union, etc. However, there is a shortcut to get the results you need by using a tool, and that is exactly what we will try to do with SQL Map today. So SQL Map is an open source penetration testing tool that helps you identify SQL injections and exploit them. Okay, before we get into hands-on with SQL Map, let's refresh some basic stuff. So when it comes to databases, we cannot neglect the importance of tables, rows, and columns. In a relational database, I'm being specific here because there are other types of database, for example, hierarchical. Anyways, in a relational database, data is stored in tables in the form of rows and columns. For example, a user table can look like the one you see in the screen. The top row here is called column headers. So user ID, username, password, and country or column headers, and anything that follows the headers vertically or column values. So for example, where username is the column header, test, admin, John, Smith, and Peter or column values. And the row is referred to as a record. In this particular case, one row, which in turn a record, will have one user's information. For example, row 1 for user ID 1 will have one test, and Egypt, which is a complete record. Now consider another table named products, which looks like the one you see in the screen. Now it's not required for an application to retrieve and or display data from one underlying table. Applications can run SQL queries to pull data from multiple tables at a time, and one powerful operator used in such a case is the union operator, which combines data from more than one table. Say for example, select country from users, union select country from products, returns Egypt, India, USA, Canada, UK, and China. Now this command here is actually two SQL commands combined using union operator. The only condition here is that the number of column headers in both the queries should match. Say for example, if you retrieve user ID and country from the first table, you should also retrieve any two column values from product tables, and the union operator will return unique entries from both the tables. Now the result of such an operation can be called a result set or a view, which is more of a virtual table. Now, for you to be able to extract data using SQL injection, you should know table and column names. Let's begin with a sample application and extract table and column names using SQL Map. That said, it's totally possible to obtain this information manually without a tool. But our aim here is to make the process as simple as possible without having to understand all the complexities of SQL. Let's begin. So the application I have chosen for today is from Web Security Academy, which allows you to freely test and learn vulnerabilities. Now, please do not run the tool on any application that you see on the internet. You're not allowed to do that without prior permission, and it is illegal. So let me launch SQL Map and run the first command to find tables and column names. This application under test uses. Now, I also want you to know that SQL Map will return a list of valid table and column names only if the application is vulnerable. So here is the application that I want to test. So I want to start with finding table names and column names using SQL Map. SQL Map and perform a complete data extraction. In specific, pull out all the username and passwords from the users table for this particular application. So let me launch SQL Map. So what I'm going to do is, as the first step, I'm going to feed the URL of this application as an input to SQL Map and try to find all the table names with a simple command. So let me copy the URL and execute the command. -u refers to URL, and then I'm going to say --tables, which instructs the tool to bring about information on all the tables that is being used by the application. Now, this is going to take a while to bring in all the results, but then what I wanted to say is typically we would follow a similar pattern to find out column names and then supply another command to see if there is SQL injection in a specific parameter and then go about extracting data. So let's wait for a minute for the tool to complete the extraction and bring back the table names. Now here it says target URL appears to have 2 columns in query. We'll get to this and find more specific information, but now let's continue to find the table names. Okay, so at the end, it did return 2 table names and the database name. So the database name for our case is referred to public. They've named it public, and there are 2 tables, products and users. Now, what really interests me is the users table, because at the end of this exercise, I want to really extract username and passwords from the users table. Now, let's get to the next step and just go about finding the column names. Now, it's going to take another minute. Yeah, this came back pretty fast. So we have 2 tables, one table which is referred to as users and another table called products, and each table has its own columns and the data type. So I'm not that interested about data type at this point because most of these are strings. Varchar refers to strings. I also see there is an integer, a couple of integers here, but then I'm interested in this table now. So it has password and username column headers or column values, and we have varchar data type, which means both of these are strings. Now I have the table name and I also have the column headers name. Now, the next thing that I wanted to do is I want to see if this particular URL and this particular parameter, which is category, is vulnerable to SQL injection. And if I find this is vulnerable to SQL injection, I want to kind of use this parameter to pull out username and password fields from the database table in itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if this parameter, so this is the URL, and anything that comes after the question mark is called query parameter, and I would want to pick one parameter. In our case, we have only one, which is category. I would want to pick that parameter and see if this parameter is SQL injectable. So I'm going to go back to SQL Map and use a similar command. to say -u URL -p, which refers to parameter, and say category. And wait for the results. Okay, so it returned the results pretty fast. There are different types of different types of SQL injection that the tool tried in itself. But one of the things that really interests me is the union query or the union based SQL injection. And if you see the payload here, it says category is equal to lifestyle, and there is a single quote. Lifestyle is the value, and there is a single quote for ending the value. It's string value in itself, and it says union all. Now you can use union or union all. The only difference is that when you say union all, there could be duplicates returned from combining the results of two tables. And then we have the second query, which says select null, comma, entire value. Now when you see a comma in a query, that is when you identify the number of columns. For now, we have a single comma here, which means this null here refers to a column value, and the entire thing after a comma refers to another column value. Now, if you see another comma after this particular big phrase, whatever you call, you can understand that there are three columns. Now, from this particular payload that SQL Map has submitted, I can clearly understand there are two column values that this particular parameter is pulling from the backend database and from the table and displaying as the information. Now, I can only guess that one of it will be the header values, the headings, and the another one would be the descriptions. Now, that is not much of an importance to us, but then I really want to kind of frame a query, supply it to the URL, and see if the page can return user ID and password. Now, let me take the query from, or the payload from, what SQL Map has supplied and kind of see if I can make it as an input of my own. So I have this. Now I take the URL, put it back here, say question mark, oh I'm sorry, quotes, union, I'll go with union and union all, doesn't make a lot of difference for me. Select. Now I know the table names, now I know the column names, so I will go with username, comma, password from users, double hyphen, which means ignore anything after this particular character, this particular powerful character, which is double hyphen. Now I'll see if I can use this as an input and access the URL to bring back usernames and passwords. It did. So like my guess, this is the heading and this is the description. So when the union operator was executed, it did bring back all the existing results based on the lifestyle category, but it did also execute the comment, the command that we supplied, which is username and password from users, and return them to the front end. So we have administrator, which is the username, and we have the administrator's password. We have another user and their password. We also have another user and their password. Now, what I really want to do is to verify if these usernames and passwords are valid and see if I can log into the application with the extracted information. So let me go here and try to log into the account. Okay, try to log into the account with the username and password that I have got and see if the application will let me log in. And it did with the username. Now, this is just a sample application where we are trying to understand and learn SQL injection and pull out information from the database. But in a real world, in a practical world, when you do testing, if you can make use of the powerful tool, the SQL Map, and pull out as information in terms of table names, in terms of column names, as much information as possible, union payloads, and also identify parameters in the application and actually perform an exploit, it is much more powerful because you're able to bypass the authentication mechanism of an application in itself. that's for today's session. Keep watching as we continue to discuss other types of vulnerabilities and also hands-on exercises to exploit and go about different vulnerabilities like cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, etc. Thank you.